The challenges we face are many and diverse, but I intend to use this morning's opportunity to highlight briefly two of the most significant issues testing the African continent's resolve: terrorism and violent extremism in the Sahel and coastal West Africa and its impact on security, and the regression of democracy in parts of Africa. If we do not renew our commitments to build, keep, and consolidate peace and democracy all over the world, we would have to brace ourselves to live in a new and more dangerous world today and in the future. In Ghana, political instability described much of the early decades of our independence, and we became notorious for sampling every and any type of political experiment. The instability was coupled with the collapse of the economy and led to the exodus from the country of many of our citizens and professionals. For the past 30 years of the Fourth Republic, we have enjoyed political stability under a liberal democratic constitution and experienced the longest period of stable constitutional governance in our hitherto tumultuous history. The separation of powers is now a real phenomenon in Ghanaian life. The fight against corruption has gone beyond propaganda and is demanding of public officials higher levels of acceptable conduct. Efficient public services are now within reach. We have in this period experienced through the ballot box the transfer of power from one ruling political party to another on 3 different occasions in conditions of peace and stability without threatening the foundations of the state. The Ghanaian people have manifested in this era their deep attachment to the principles of democratic accountability, respect for individual liberties and human rights, and the rule of law. We're making systematic advances, especially if you consider that we have just celebrated our 66th independence anniversary, and we're able to say that we are indeed making significant progress. For the first time in a long while, young people can make long-term plans and live out their dreams without interruption. In much the same way, businesses can think ahead, begin to think big, and be certain that the laws of the country are not subject to capricious changes. We're all much more relaxed in the knowledge that we live under a regime of the rule of law, and that when disputes arise, as they would in all human endeavors, they would be settled fairly. If I were pressed, I would mention in particular the electoral process as the greatest source of potential instability. The trigger for many wars and disputes around the continent can be traced to dissatisfaction with the conduct of elections. We in Ghana have gone through our own traumas about elections. There have been boycotts, there's been anger, and there have been famous election petitions before the courts. I say, however, we have a reliable electoral system which is systematically improving and deserving of the growing confidence of the people. One of the greatest threats to our democracy has to be the proliferation and sophistication of terrorist networks in Africa. They should not only be a source of great concern to the continent of Africa, but they should also be of concern to the rest of the world. Africa has become the center of attraction for terrorist groups which are multiplying in the region, following defeats suffered in other parts of the world. Nowhere is this more evident than in the Sahel. In addition to the numerous attacks orchestrated by these armed criminal gangs, their presence in the region fuels violence along communal and sectarian lines in countries such as we're witnessing Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And in the insecurity engendered by the armed groups has resulted in rising levels of displacement of populations in many parts of the Sahel. This is a time for a global coalition of democracies, a coalition of the willing, determined to banish the specter of terrorism and violent extremism. The 11 member states of the 15 member states of ECOWAS, the 4 military-led states having been suspended, despite the considerable economic difficulties confronting each of them, have made clear their willingness to take the fight to the terrorists if they were sufficiently empowered. The terrorists, as we all know, were chased out of the Middle East and Afghanistan before taking refuge in Muammar Gaddafi's Libya, from where they fled across the Sahara to find refuge in northern Mali after Gaddafi's downfall. They have spread their pernicious influence eastwards and southwards, with the coastal states of West Africa their ultimate destination. They can be chased out of West Africa and the Sahel too. Foreign troops would not have to be involved. West African troops can do the job. The resurgence of unconstitutional changes of government in some parts of Africa creates a leadership vacuum which inhibits our efforts to address the security problems facing the continent. We'll see military takeovers in Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Gabon, and a failed coup attempt in Guinea-Bissau. Military takeovers expose further the fragilities of democratic governance in Africa, with these takeovers taking on a now common pattern. The problem we have is that we have already lost so much time that we cannot afford a slow period of growth. We have a dynamic, restless young population who demand and deserve the best in the world. They're not in a mood to wait for the dividends from a slow progression, as the trek across the Sahara vividly illustrates. The pressing challenge for us in Africa is how we negotiate successfully the interface between elections and democratic governance, institution building and development, poverty and economic growth, stability and jobs, with the overriding objective being enhancing the dignity of the African. There's little doubt that the extension of term limits by some leaders to strengthen their grip on power creates fertile grounds for military interventions to feed on discontent. Dealing with the problem of coups, therefore, may well start from the civilian governments, which have the primary responsibility to build trust in the democratic dispensation in these challenging times. There should be no backtracking, backsliding in support for democratic values anchored on the promotion of the rule of law and respect for human rights. And when the coups do happen, we must extend collectively the needed support to the transition process, including in the Sahel, where the military, having tasted power, seem reluctant to restore democratic rule. I believe strongly that despite its numerous challenges, Africa is on the cusp of building a great new civilization, which will unleash the considerable energies and huge potential of the African peoples so that they can make their own unique contribution to the growth of world civilization. By 2050, the population of Africa will be 2.5 billion, all things being equal, up from the current figure of 1.3 billion, which will mean that 1 in 4 people on the planet will be an African. The median age for this population will be 25 years. A dynamic, young, active population sitting on the resources of the world's richest continent in mineral resources and arable land would be a powerful magnet for transformative investment and cooperation. Its potential to generate unprecedented levels of global prosperity are immense. Pax Africana is to be welcomed and cherished. I thank you for your attention.
I'm a king, yes, I'm a king, I think I'm a king,